Okay, I think we are now. Yes, all set. Perfect. So welcome everyone to our 9th practical dialogue on reconciliation. I'm Lucia and I'm a member of Embrace Dialogue, so of Rodemos el Diálogo. And today we will talk about the nexus between mine action and reconciliation, in particular looking at the case of Humanicemos DH, a mine action organization created by former FARC members in Colombia. So this event is a part of a series of dialogues organized by the Winchester Centre of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace, Embrace Dialogue, so this organization, and the Oxford Network for Peace Studies, which seeks to promote a multicultural, interdisciplinary global dialogue about reconciliation. This year, Embrace Dialogue is celebrating 10 years since its founding, so it's a very special year for us. And we're really, really thankful that more and more people are joining our events. We are really delighted also about our partnership with the University of Winchester and their Centre of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace, and also the Oxford Network for Peace Studies, which is our recent addition to this specific series of online dialogues. So if you don't know us yet, but I think quite a lot of you actually do, and just very briefly about who we are. So Embrace Dialogue is a Colombian peace-building organization promoting the culture of dialogue. You will hear a little bit more about dialogue by Andre later on, but just so you know what we do. So we're involved in different aspects of peace building. In Colombia, it's more work on ground as well. We work on transitional justice, peace pedagogy, and youth-led projects on a global level, dialogues such as this one. And we try to take the learnings from Colombia and sort of see how they can be applied to other places around the world. But we're also very, very keen to learn from other people's and other organizations' experiences and bring those learnings back to Colombia. Reconciliation is sort of at the center of the work, of our work. And these critical dialogues of reconciliation are therefore really, really important to us. And through this series of events, we will continue inviting practitioners, academics, decision makers to share their research and policies and activities around reconciliation processes. So we do think that reconciliation is at the center of resolving issues today. And we feel there's a critical approach is basically needed to address the legacies of long-lasting divisions within and between societies around the world. And we feel this might be a tool to start approaching resolving them. In the chat box of the Zoom, I will post a couple of links where you can subscribe to our newsletter. You can follow us on a couple of social media channels as well, and follow us, join future events, which I hope you will do. But I think that's basically it. So I'm not going to be too long. Once again, on behalf of Embrace Dialogue, the Centre of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace at the University of Winchester, and the Oxford Network of Peace for Peace Studies, welcome to all of you who have joined. I am now handing over to Dr. Andre Gomez Suarez, who is a senior research fellow at the Centre of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace, and he's also the co-founder of Embrace Dialogue. And he will be chairing today's dialogue, but also introducing today's guest. Andre.
Thank you, Lucia, and thank you everyone for coming. And it's fantastic to have Phillip here. It's really a privilege to have the chance to talk to you, Phillip, and to have the chance to share with us your thoughts on reconciliation and based on your experience on mine action. I will introduce Phillip shortly, but let me just thank all the participants. I see people who have come to previous critical dialogues on reconciliation, and that's fantastic because the idea of this series is to create a process of thinking together, and that doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't happen in one session. That happens over a series of sessions. And so it's amazing to see that some of you are coming back to these spaces. In order to have a dialogue, we believe, and Rodemos el Diálogo has been working on this for 10 years, on creating some basic principles of interaction. And those principles of interaction are basically shared by the three organizations that have come together. But let me just then put them on the table for us to navigate this 2 hours and a half with these principles in mind. So the first principle is generosity. So we ask you to be fully present in this hour and a half. second principle is solidarity, and is try to stop your own feelings and try to nurture the feelings for others and the needs of others. The third principle is co-responsibility. We believe that this space can be held by all of us, bringing together and thinking together. The fourth principle is honesty. So we ask you to speak from experience. We ask you to be humble and recognize that sometimes we don't know everything and that there is always something very enriching for all of us in this space. The fifth principle is respect. We invite you to see your own reactions to other people's assumptions and to suspend judgment. And the sixth principle is self-criticism. So we invite you to try to don't confuse your assumptions with reality and try to be critical of your own prejudices so that you can be open to change your mind about some of these issues that we're talking about. We believe that these principles would allow us to create and sustain a dialogue today. We understand dialogue as a horizontal transformative process, which gets closer to David Bohm's idea of creating a stream of meaning flowing among and through us. So the invitation today is to leave aside the old patterns of interaction. This is not a seminar. This is a space of spontaneity for us to think together and to see our individual patterns of thought and our inconsistencies. So the structure of today's dialogue is the following. We will start sharing some ideas with Phillip. We will try to ignite a dialogue together. We expect to put lots of ideas on the table that then you can just use for your own thinking to try to nurture your ideas. And we ask you during that time to please don't drop questions on the chat. We want to try for you to keep those ideas and those questions or comments that you might have flowing in your mind, so that you let your own thought process flow. And then once we open the floor for comments or questions, we invite you to turn your camera on, to turn your microphone on, to put your hands up, and to start making your questions or your comments. The idea would be that we are going to listen to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of you, depending, and then we will go back to Phil, not necessarily to answer questions, but to see where your comments and questions have taken him and his thought process too. Please be aware that this session is being live streamed, so that when you talk, you will be in this live stream video in our YouTube channel. And at the end of the session, what I would do is try to do 5 minutes of wrapping up, trying to put together some food for thought of what has emerged in this space, and hopefully leave that food for thought on the table for each one of you to continue thinking about the issues that we have brought today. So without further ado, let me introduce Jan Phillip Clever, our 9th guest in this critical dialogue on reconciliation. Phillip joined the United Nations in 2004. He has served in different functions in various countries affected by conflict with development needs. Among others, Phil worked on good governance projects in the Arab region. He worked in the Nile Basin Initiative, supporting a negotiated solution to the water resource challenges between the riparian countries of the Nile River Basin, and he managed an election observation mission to strengthen democratic institutions in Kenya. He also worked on conflict-sensitive programming to deliver essential health services to vulnerable ethnic populations in Myanmar. From 2016 to 2021, Phillip led the United Nations Humanitarian Mine Action Program in Colombia as director of the program manager. The program works to mitigate the risks of anti-personnel mines to affected communities, as well as supporting the implementation of the mine action-related elements of the peace agreement and to facilitate the entry of development across and initiatives into post-conflict areas of Colombia. Throughout his career with the United Nations, Phillip has worked on connecting the humanitarian, peace-building, and development dimensions of the so-called triple nexus. He currently works as a consultant to the UN in Geneva, Switzerland. So that's our guest today. I met Phillip last November when we were doing a bit of field work in Colombia. And really, Phillip, thank you so much for your generosity. You were so kind to us and for deciding to join us in this special dialogue. So I hope that everyone who is here now can really enjoy this opportunity to dialogue with Phillip and, to exchange ideas together with someone who has this expertise on Colombia and this practitioner experience in Colombia and in other countries of the world. So Phillip, let's start with a basic question to kick this dialogue off, and is, can mine action contribute to reconciliation?
Thanks, Andre. Maybe before all, can you quickly confirm that you hear me all right? Okay,
perfect.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for creating this space of dialogue. Maybe I should at the onset also say that I very much buy into the idea of a learning process and a mutual learning process at that. So in that sense, there are no foregone conclusions in what we'll be talking about, what I will be presenting, and I expect to learn myself in the course of this dialogue. So really, by all means, pose questions and let's have an informed discussion on the issue. What I propose going into your question is that I quickly give an outline of the contamination situation globally, but then Colombia specifically. Maybe spend a minute or two on what mine action pretends to do. And then end on giving some thoughts on reconciliation, which is a challenging concept in this context, but a very interesting one that I hope we can unpack over time. So if that's fine, then I'll start by sort of giving a broader introduction to the explosive ordnance contamination at the global level. It is by and large estimated that about 1/3 of the world's countries are affected by some level of contamination, and about 60 million people are thought to live close to hazardous areas. When we speak about explosive ordnance, what that refers to is, on the one hand, anti-personnel mines, landmines as they're typically known, and unexploded ordnance. So unexploded ordnance are explosive remnants of war, which have been fired but didn't function as they were intended to, and now pose a threat to communities where they exist. The impact of explosive ordnances is a threat to life and limb of affected communities. It causes forced displacement, it causes confinement of the communities. Their presence causes restrictions of access to infrastructure and essential services, generating greater vulnerability of affected populations, resulting in the loss of livelihood. And due to the presence of explosive ordnance, communities have lost access to productive land, to water, which generates food insecurity, have lost access to schools, to hospitals, to markets, which prevents them from opportunities for education, healthcare, and economic inclusion. There's a specific element in Colombia as well, but elsewhere in the same fashion, which is the impact on ethnic peoples. The presence of mines has an impact on the culture in a way that mines block roads to live their customs and follow their traditions and rituals. Lastly, of course, the presence of explosive ordnance can also impede the access of humanitarian and development actors to affected areas of the country. Let me pass quickly to Colombia to just give you a couple of key data in relation to the contamination. In February of last year, Colombia surpassed a very sad milestone in that 12,000 victims of explosive ordnance accidents where happened, and for now a total number of 12,182 since official records started in 1990. And the majority over the past 5 years of these victims have been civilian. And out of the total number of more than 12,000, more than 10% have been minors, younger than 18 years, which really highlights the indiscriminate use of the weapon, which is banned by international humanitarian law. Every victim is one too many. In Colombia, 20% of the victims out of these 12,000 have died as a consequence of the accident, whilst 80% survive mines, which highlights the life-altering impact that mines have. And in the international context, we refer to them as survivors, to use a term that, whilst having suffered that life-altering accident, highlights the resilience and the empowerment to reintegrate as productive members of society. Colombia, in terms of the numbers of victims, has the second highest number of victims after Afghanistan worldwide. So that puts into relation what that impact is. Half of Colombia's 1,100 municipalities have had one or more accidents involving explosive ordnance. And there's two realities of contamination in Colombia. There's legacy contamination, which relates to the conflict with the FARC, and there's ongoing installation and contamination of mines because non-state armed actors still use mines as a weapons of war. Maybe at the later stage we can deeper dive into the different motivations there, and why the landmine, the anti-personnel mine, is such an quote-unquote attractive weapon in the eyes of non-state armed actors. Humanitarian mine action. What do we do to respond to this threat? Humanitarian mine action consists of 5 pillars typically. In Colombia, and I'll focus on that here, it concentrates on 3 main efforts. First is the elimination of the risk. That's through demining, or what also is called clearance, which really is the physical removal of the mine. The process of that is an evidence-based diagnostic. There's a database that records every incident with explosive ordnance, which is used as a point of departure, which then leads to what is called community liaison and non-technical surveys. And the idea there is that you sit down with the affected communities, and through the information that they hold on accidents, on threats, on communications that they may have received, on groups, non-state actors that they have seen pass through the area. It is through this community liaison that you try to identify and define as precisely as possible the areas that are considered dangerous or hazardous. And together with the community, a decision is then taken on which areas to prioritize for the clearance, because clearance is a very labor-intensive and cost-intensive process. So where resources are limited, a prioritization has to take place. The community liaison also is important to explain the humanitarian nature of the work, as well as to seek the approval of the communities to actually work. And that is under the principle of doing no harm, because it might be that indeed, certainly in areas in Colombia where conflict is still ongoing, that the actual clearance of a weapon that is considered active and tactical by non-state actors could cause harm. Typically, we don't operate in areas of ongoing conflict. The elimination results in what's called land release. So that is a certification that all reasonable effort has been undertaken to clear the land, and it is therefore considered free of the suspicion of landmines. What is key in this process is the trust in the process. It is governed by very rigorous protocols, and that is also aimed, or these protocols also aim to, as well as a very rigorous monitoring process that is independent from the operation, aim to restore the trust of the communities in their land. And then, of course, each explosive artifact that is destroyed means one less chance of accident and a victim. Second pillar is prevention through what is called explosive ordnance risk education. This is through workshops with the communities where the identification of such artifacts is being taught, as well as safe behaviors around the presence of such artifacts, safe comportments to avoid accidents. This is the main humanitarian mine action response in areas with ongoing conflict dynamics where demining operations cannot be realized. The third one is victims assistance, meaning assistance to those who unfortunately have suffered an accident, to ultimately achieve the socioeconomic reintegration of the survivors. There's various elements to that. There's the post-traumatic medical and psychosocial work. There's physical rehabilitation work, as well as professional and technical training to achieve that reintegration. What's important in the package that humanitarian mine action offers is that it is really based as thought as an intervention of the people, prioritized and approved by the communities, as I said, by the people. That many of the mine action operators, as a best practice, employ local communities in the clearance, those who apply and are interested, of course, but also for economic benefit to them, direct economic benefit to them, in having an economic opportunity with the operator, as well as for the people, because ultimately, of course, the clearance process that I spoke about is about returning the land to the communities. So it really is very community centered in its approach. Let me then spend 2 minutes on reconciliation, which, as I said, is really sort of just a set of ideas that came to mind as we had our preparatory talk, Andre. And again, no foregone conclusions. No, this is not pitched as any sort of academic rigor or concept. So it's really just sort of spoken from the experience that we had in the context of Colombia. And of course, reconciliation as part of peace building or as a result of peace building is a tremendously difficult process. Generally, you have two former enemies that you bring to a table to agree, and then to basically live with one another going forward, and more so try to restructure the society in a joint vision of peace. So trust is a key element or trust building is a key element in that trajectory to reconciliation. And I think in the Colombian context, and from what I just presented in terms of what we're trying to achieve with mine action really can be particularly relevant where, in terms of the trust building, where institutionality has historically been institutionality thought or understood as the presence of the state or state services has historically been very weak, which is the case in Colombia and in many of the rural areas, or even non-existent for the various reasons. So mine action, which often is one of the first interventions that happen in a post-conflict situation, can generate a trust or can rebuild trust of the communities in the state or the legitimate authorities through the decision that has been taken to improve the livelihood and the conditions of living through mine action in those remote areas. I mentioned the involvement of the affected communities, so their involvement as well as survivors of explosive ordnance accidents in mine action, particularly in mine risk education or explosive ordnance risk education, be it as actual workers in mine action or as beneficiaries, further strengthens the trust of the communities and helps to heal wounds. Opening a door already into where the dialogue is going just in a bit, involving ex-combatants in mine action processes, be that through as individuals to operators or through their own humanitarian demining organization, allows them to be positively viewed by the communities and by the wider society. In Colombia, and I can only assume, and I'm really looking forward to hear comments on this. Reconciliation really puts the victims at the center of any effort. The peace agreement is very clear. It's a victim-centered transitional justice element that leads to reconciliation, and that effort is only validated as satisfactory if the victims so agree and approve. So my sense was that, of course, that there's a legal element to it, but there's also the forgiveness element into it that we can try help and generate, and that is very difficult in any peace process, of course, to achieve that. Also because it's so multifaceted. In Colombia, we had on a number of occasions, and you're very aware that the peace agreement was actually voted down in the referendum, even though by the smallest of margins and for a number of various reasons, but it was voted down. I went to Colombia at that time for the first time, and I really was startled at that outcome. But through various conversations, it clearly is much more complex than a simple binary yes or no. So many very informed and very sort of constructive thinking people said, no, I'm in favor of peace, of course, but just not this peace. So there are nuances in the way that this needs to be defined to achieve or to facilitate forgiveness. No, I'll close on that. If a trajectory to if trust and forgiveness are a trajectory to reconciliation, then facilitating the spaces for dialogue and exchange to meet and engage is part of this process, and that is what MindAction clearly can do for the various interventions at the community level that I mentioned. Reparation is what perpetrators or former combatants can offer, and which is an offer to the victims for them to accept the same, and that is what MindAction is doing as well, and sort of reversing what has been the devastating impact on land and communities by cleaning up what they themselves have initially installed. But it remains just that, an offer at the onset. Last point that I'll make, Andre, before I'll hand back to you, is that reconciliation, of course, is also with oneself, right? It's also about forgiving oneself. And many of the ex-combatants that participated in MindAction did so exactly because it was also for them a path to be able to reflect critically on their contribution to the conflict and try to make that peace with themselves. Andrew.
Okay. I think you have given us a really detailed overview of this, and as I was listening to you, I kept thinking, of course, all these different connections with reconciliation, and it's really interesting the way how you have brought this sort of definition, or the way how you understand reconciliation towards the end. In the recent years, the organizations like Conciliation Resources have been working on a comprehensive approach to reconciliation, in which the claim is that reconciliation processes should be at the center of peace building. It shouldn't be the outcome of peace building and comes towards the end, but that without a focus on reconciliation from the very beginning, peace building is never going to succeed. And they have this very ambitious approach of, they've been suggesting this idea that reconciliation could be conceived. And we had a critical dialogue with Rachel Clark, one of the authors of a report by Conciliation Resources, in which they claim that reconciliation is basically focusing on 3 main or 4 main areas. One is dealing with the past, sort of, how do we understand what happened in the past? Then secondly is sort of trying to create different relations in the present, both between the state and the communities and within the communities. So what they call creating a new social contract, and at the same time creating social cohesion. So, you know, those three processes that happen in the present are so important. And then a final one that is envisioning a different future. And there are a series of activities that could take place amongst those different four processes, and they do not happen in order. It's not that first we deal with the past, then we work on the present, and then we focus on the future, but they can happen simultaneously. And one of the activities that comes to my mind that could actually really propel and encourage reconciliation processes is mind action, because of the different dimensions that you were precisely mentioning just in answering the first question. So your intuition, what tells you, is absolutely, I feel that is absolutely right in the way that, you know, it connects many of the different elements: transitional justice, dealing with the past, but at the same time changing, creating social cohesion. There are not different communities who could not be connected in the past working together, creating a new social contract with the state, and thinking about future economic projects because they can reclaim the land. So all of these seems to come together through mind action. But you have mentioned something, and this allows me to, you know, so this is the general comment I want to make. And probably you could react to this comment, but also let me put the next thing on the table that I think is so enriching, because you've mentioned the participation of former combatants in mind action activities. But as far as I know, in the case of Colombia, in the case of Humanicemos DH, is something absolutely new, because this is the first time in the history, I don't know, that mind action is happening by an organization that is created by former combatants and is run by former combatants. And that seems to be something absolutely unique. So why don't you tell us a bit more about, because you were actually, you know, you were a key player in that particular moment. You saw the evolution of this. So why don't you tell us a bit this work of Humanicemos DH in Colombia and the connection that the work that they have been doing could in particular have to reconciliation processes between what you could say like previous people who were perpetrators or who were up in arms and the victims who were affected by the landmines that they laid on the territory?
That's a loaded question, but yes, absolutely, or a loaded comment, and great. Thanks for making it. I think we'll come back later to sort of where reconciliation stands in the wider process of transforming the conflict. But let's go and delve a little bit into the Humanicemos side of things. I think it's important to know that there have been mind action elements that already were included in the peace agreement and during the negotiations, right? And one of them being that in the understanding the relevance of reintegration, that mind action was looked at as a possible route to socioeconomic reintegration. It wasn't thought of as an organization, which makes this case very particular, but as due to the knowledge that they bring from the conflict as something that could answer to a number of requirements, a multidimensional answer, as you said. There was reconciliation considerations, there were reparation considerations, there was socioeconomic reintegration considerations, as well as development considerations, because mines or the presence of explosive ordnance generally is an impediment to rural development. So it was already conceived in the peace agreement that it could play a role in socioeconomic reintegration. By no means was this thought of as an organization. It was leaning on experiences in other countries where individual ex-combatants were then recruited by demining organizations, typically international ones who would bring the know-how and the practices, of course, as well as the training capacity, to make use of the specific knowledge that conflict skills, as it were, of the individual combatants to bring that on board in the demining effort. So they know they may have information on where mines were installed. They may have information on the patterns in which mines were installed. And in Colombia, particularly, they may have information on the composition of mines, because the situation of contamination in Colombia is such that none of the mines is a commercial landmine, and a military industrially produced one, but they're all what is called artisanal improvised explosive devices that function as a mine. So the composition of what is in that mine is very specific knowledge, right? And that goes, it's different from explosivista to explosivista. So you don't necessarily know or have a standard idea of what you're looking for. So all that knowledge is very important in what is the demining process, right? So we have examples from other countries, Somaliland and Cambodia, where ex-combatants were hired by operators to help them in the demining effort. That was initially also the one of the first ideas in Colombia that would go forward. The big challenge with that was, of course, that there was a complete lack of trust at the beginning of the implementation of the peace agreement. It had just been voted down by as I said, a small majority of the Colombian populace. A government had just come into power in 2008 then, that ran on a platform against the peace agreement, or mainly aiming at dismantling the peace agreement. So there was a lot of distrust from both sides as to the true commitment to the peace process. And many of the ex-combatants saw themselves, or were afraid to be seen as providing information that they didn't know how valuable it was at the time. And we may be able to speak about that as well. Legally valuable. There is a reparation element in providing that information, and transitional justice is there to recognize that effort that's being made and convert that into some sort of legal equivalent, right? A reduced sentence, or what is called a sanction, a special sanction, I think it is in a special purpose sanction, as it's called in English. So the beginning was marked by a deep distrust between the various stakeholders, and none was really willing to join one of the existing operators for fear of being perceived as you know, from the collective idea of going into the peace process, for fear of being perceived as a traitor. In a certain way, without the necessary guarantees in place and structures in place. And that changed then when the idea of Humanicemos was born, which really came out of the ex-combatant community itself. So they proposed to form this organization, and we from the United Nations very much supported that idea, seen what challenges we had to get hold of the information and to incorporate ex-combatants in the demining processes. This is very valuable information. Let me just take a quick bracket here. Everything is easier in demining if you have that kind of information, right? You don't need to search for them. You basically know where to go to, you know what to look for, and hence it can be a much less intensive, labor-intensive and cost-intensive process. So it's very valuable information, but the more time goes, the more time passes by, the less is the quality of that information, and the less will people remember, especially in very rural areas where the mines have been planted. So it was very much from a technical perspective something that we supported, and that we offered together with the government to provide to the ex-combatants in terms of capacity building, giving them a basic understanding of what it takes to run the organization, and what elements as global best practices would be needed in setting up such organization from a technical perspective. So that is what happened then. And so Humanicemos was founded in June 2017, July 2017. And really started with a very few ex-combatants at hand, but it was always the one solution that was offered to the ex-combatant community as if you want to participate in this effort, if this is for you, then Humanicemos would be the only one vehicle for socioeconomic reintegration through mine action. Yeah, maybe I stop there because that's just sort of a very broad intro to that, and let you lead a little bit more by questions to deeper dive.
Yeah, and I guess so you have given us the picture of the challenges of creating this organization, and something that I find incredible, and it's something that I've been trying to think about, is how all of these efforts of peace building are like the product of creative moments. They are not planned 100%, but they happen. And when you say that it was the former combatants who suddenly found this solution because of the lack of trust on the different institutions, they didn't want to go and work there. And suddenly, even though it wasn't on the peace agreement, they come with the idea of, we want to set up this organization. That's what I call spontaneous peace building, and I think needs to be researched because goes beyond the logic of the log frames and all the 100% planning how things are going to happen, and it's not actually, some of these things cannot be planned, and is the power of transforming reality and working on reconciliation comes from that. So let me ask you one final question in this moment, just to sort of open the floor for people to ask you more questions of these ideas that you have shared, or to make comments based on their expertise. It has to do with when you started accompanying the work of Humanicemos. Once it was created, I know that there were very serious challenges in order to get the first demining activity on the ground because of all the geopolitical issues around this. But let's don't focus on the challenges in this moment, but let's try to focus on the positives. And probably other people can ask questions about, what was the role of the Duque administration of the US But when you started seeing that former combatants came to the communities and tried to start doing this work with the communities who have been affected by the FARC in the past, probably the perpetrator, some of them were not operating the same regions where they were going to do the demining, but how do you see, how did you perceive this sort of work by this organization compared to other experiences that you had seen on the ground? And could we see that there is something there powerful in terms of what we could learn for reconciliation processes?
Okay, I need to unpack this a little bit, because I share your enthusiasm on that innovative moment and that sort of spontaneous ad hoc sort of spark in that situation. However, there are nuances to this, of course, right? One important aspect of it is I referred to earlier is the rigorous protocols and the planning that goes into humanitarian mine action, specifically because it's so intense and so cost and labor intensive, that this is something that needs to be very carefully planned and then allocated in terms of the tasks that the operators have, right? The way that the global humanitarian mine action sector is organized is that it falls under the purview or the umbrella of the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, APMC. Many may know it as the Ottawa Convention. And Lady Di played an important role in 1997 for those who may be old enough to remember that. The member states have the obligation to clear, then as they subscribe to as they ratify the convention, have the obligation to clear the land, the territory of mines. It is never an individual organization that drives that planning process and that strategic sort of overview for the entire country and prioritizes the intervention. They contribute to it, but it's never the organization itself that goes out to any given community and then sort of engages, right? So it's a very rigorously planned to very strict standards process. Now, with Humanicemos, there were a number of considerations that went into this process. So where do they best operate, and what can we suggest to them on where they should start? Does it make sense to to start where they're likely to run into more resistance from the receiving affected communities, because they see them still as perpetrators. This is the very early days of the peace agreement, right? Or do we place them somewhere where they're still in need because mines are present, or where we expect that communities traditionally, historically, will be more open to ex-combatants intervening in such matter in community affairs. And the latter was also considered for the security of the ex-combatants. As we know, the security guarantees of the process are not working very well. We have a devastating number of ex-combatants who have been killed and still are being killed. Which is contributing to the distrust that many of the ex-combatants have vis-a-vis the state. So it was also a consideration of where would it be a safe enough environment for them to operate in. Mind you, these are they operate on humanitarian principles. So they're out in very rural areas in terms of protection, nothing else but the fact that they're humanitarian actors and intervene as such with the communities. Right? So we decided on the latter, and which then led to the first deployment in Caquetá, in the municipality of La Montañita. And there we had even there we had a number of situations as we were accompanying the first engagements with the communities that resulted in very strong pushback by the communities. No, you should. What are you doing here again? And now you're trying to tell me that you want to change it. But basically, really sort of calling them out as dishonest in first laying the mines and now coming back to clear them. But it was through what is the established process of familiarizing the concept of humanitarian mine action, explaining what the impact is, and of course the communities would live it on an everyday basis, right? Was it that these doors were opened? I remember one particular situation where in old institute it was a mine risk education, an explosive ordnance risk education workshop, and I remember one old lady to basically get up and shout in the face of what we call the teacher or the workshop facilitator, and say that he had no right and no place to be there. And it really depends, and basically a standoff of I don't think you should be here, and we don't think you should be working here. And it really then comes down to the for lack of better word, to the communication skills, and then the people skills, and reading the situation of the facilitators to engage in a dialogue over this, right? And try to insist on why they're doing this, why this is a journey for themselves as well, not just for the communities, and why this is a reflection of their commitment to the peace process. And that's on a number of occasions, but particularly this one was exactly what then led to basically the community's approval of letting them work in that context, right? But it is a function of a number of facilitating elements of the environment. It's not a single point that just, okay, mine action is just a force of good, and that's why everybody will just accept it and go along with it. Certainly not when it comes from ex-combatants.
That's brilliant, and I really want to now start inviting people to put their hands up so that we don't, sort of monopolize this dialogue just between you and me. Let me make 2 comments, but please put the hands up so that I can, once I finish, I can start going around with some of you. One is that when you mentioned the tensions between the communities and the FARC at the beginning in these workshops, it makes me think of Andrew Schaap's definition of political reconciliation, in which now has been taken forward with the idea that there is an agonistic reconciliation. so that reconciliation is not easy, but is a political process full of tensions and visions, and you know, like political with a small p, not necessarily with big P, but I think actually is with a small, big, and with G, the geopolitical. So reconciliation is at this very contentious process where there are tensions that you need to get over, and you give a really good example of that. But then the other thing that you mentioned, and is that I think most theories of reconciliation recognize, is the importance of dialogue. And it's like, how do you navigate those workshops where dialogue is at the center of the expectations, of the needs of the communities, of both parties, and how you need the patience and the skilled facilitator to help navigate that journey. As you mentioned, you make me think of John Paul Lederach with his idea that reconciliation is a journey to a meeting place where justice, peace, truth, and mercy meet in order to make reconciliation possible. So this has been very, very enriching. I just wanted to make those comments that came to my mind as I was listening to you, Philip. And then I see that Lee is already wanting to jump on the floor. So Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you, Philip. I have a lot of things that I would like to ask, but I'll maybe I'll ask them one at a time to give other people a chance. One of the questions that I had in terms of your interaction with the community members is, in a sense, why are they hostile towards the coming in of the ex-combatants? I mean, I can understand the historical hostilities, but is it that they want something, the community wants something different? Do they want punishment rather than reconciliation? So is that part of the tension, in addition to sort of historic distrust? But I also wanted to, and so I wanted to think about that in a way that so much of transitional justice has focused on the punitive side of it, of the accountability side of it. And the work that you're doing is a different kind of accountability, accountability for wrongdoing through action. And we had a very interesting dialogue earlier in the year with some FARC ex-combatants, both firmantes and disidentes. And one of the things that struck me is this dialogue around going to Palestina Huila and making in an act of reconciliation, and that the community rejected the ex-combatants' in a sense, empty act of apology, unless there was some sort of action attached to that. And for that community, the end of the conflict hadn't happened because of the landmines. And essentially the community extracted from those who had appeared to apologize an agreement that they would demine the land. And I wondered if perhaps this was something that was already, when it was presented, it sounded like something that happened at the moment in this act of apology and then a demand from the community, but had this already been worked on in advance? The argument that the community made is that the community cannot return to its former pre-conflict life because of the landmines and the economic consequences, you know, of not being able to go back to a sort of tourism or other kinds of working the land as well. And so in that sense, there was a willingness to think about reconciliation, but reconciliation as a form of action, not as dialogue only. So this kind of dovetails what Andre was saying, that the dialogue involved, this is what you have to give us for us to be able to move forward. So it was more of a, what I would call an exchange, a compact, an agreement about how we can work together to overcome this through action as well as through words. So there are many layers to what I was just asking you, but I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about this community response. And also, I think to add one more part of it, which is that from the ex-combatants' viewpoint, this had also not only been not only an act of reconciliation, but it was also an act of transformation, that they were turning themselves into peace builders when they had previously had an image of being peace breakers. So that kind of transformative act of being able to do something more than sign an agreement, but actually act in a way that would be building communities that had been destroyed. And from their view, this was consistent with why they joined the armed struggle in the first place. So it was a kind of a new way of being able to advance a social justice agenda, and one that was also oriented around peace rather than conflict.
That's fantastic, Lee. Thank you so much. I mean, lots of food for thought, and I already have some ideas too of some of the things that I saw, and I'm pretty sure that Phil will have many clever things to say too. But so that we don't, this doesn't become a Q&A, I really like to invite other people to also offer their thoughts, to bring, Lee has put more things on the table. If people would like to react also to Lee's ideas, the whole idea is that we own this space together, and it's not only, 3 people. So please, could someone else jump in and ask a question or make a comment? Fantastic. Mafe, please.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe, for your sharing of your experience. And listening to you and to Lee, I was reminded by this other group of ex-combatants that are also helping. They created an organization called Corporación Reencuentros, and they are actively searching for people who have been forcibly disappeared. So they are also participating in helping family members to find their loved ones that they themselves, as FARC or other actors, have forcibly disappeared. And then I think of what Andre was saying of these grassroots, what I consider as grassroots forms of reconciliation that take time, that are uneasy, that people, of course, will need to, as Lee was saying, will ask from ex-combatants something more than just, please forgive us, because it's empty if you don't do anything else. But then you see these other forms that are taking place and that are helping to slowly and with a lot of effort, as you said, are taking place. So maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think are forms that we can see as materializations of reconciliation by these ex-combatants. That was what I wanted to share.
Brilliant, Mafe. I think you're bringing this, how, something that happens in one part, because when I saw this Corporación Reencuentros, I really thought of Humanicemos DH, and I thought, wow, what a similar thing that is happening now in regards to the search of the disappeared people. So one thing that you do somewhere then becomes something that is replicated in a different sort of way by a different group of former combatants, and it's interesting. I think you have added, again, more food for thought on this table. Would someone else like to jump in here before we go back to Phillip, and so that you can bring some new elements to the table to see where this takes us? Okay, I think, Phillip, if you want, why don't we go back to you? We reflect a bit. You don't, like, let's just put our thoughts together, and we invite others to join in after we give back some comments on this that we have been sharing together.
Yeah, sounds good. And thank you, Lee and Magda, I think it was, no, for your questions and comments. No, Lee, I agree with you. I mean, I think there's no one size fits all. No, is there first the action and then the apology? Is there first the apology and then the action? Sort of what communities need, and that will differ from the level of affectation that they have had, as well as the individual composition of the communities. I mean, what was the sequencing, if any, by the transitional justice system is, of course, that you have an acknowledgement first, right, and then or that there's fact finding put out first, and truth finding, there's acknowledgement of the same, and then it results in sort of the sentences and the actions. Let me try to go back to the particular case that you just described in Willem, because I remember the situation, and not to forget what I said at the onset, which is it was and it continues to be a process that's severely challenged by the lack of trust between the parties. Certainly with this government, I'll be very, very frank. It is also a process that significantly suffers from underfunding and from very, very slow processes to put the post-conflict architecture, as it was envisioned by the peace agreement, into functioning shape. Right, there was long budget discussions on the special jurisdiction for peace, and it started very late. We had a very that created a lot of impatience, a lot of uncertainty around the process, which I think in part explains some of the recidivism that we've seen throughout the process. The distance you mentioned already, at least those that signed up to the peace in the first place. And that's to no small extent a result from everything moving very, very slowly. That particular initiative that you mentioned was prompted by the special jurisdiction at the time only starting to consider what could be reparatory actions that have, I mentioned it earlier, a legal value or legal consideration in what ultimately could become the sanctions, right? Because all the ex-combatants assume that they will appear before the special jurisdiction in one way, shape, or another. And so there was also a very, and I don't try to be sobering in a way, but there clearly was a longing by the ex-combatant community for clear structures, for certainty in the architecture, in the institutionality that was never quite satisfied, right, from the side of the government. And the special jurisdiction did the best with the limited resources, and still do, and it's ramping up. And if it weren't for the support of the international community, I think it would be in an entirely different shape. But it was sort of that situation that prompted indeed a very grassroots initiative, where then ex-combatants and the community came together and said, like, we want to do this. We want to define what we can do for you, and for you to accept what we want to do. And we want to raise this up as a victim and perpetrator-driven dialogue and action that could be considered as a reparatory action, because both of us are already at the same table, right? So that this was sort of a bottom-up pressure to get things going, because it was going very slowly, and it remained very, very slow. But I mean sobering, because of course there's an interest also on the side of a right interest on the side of the ex-combatants to understand and to have valued their actions as something that counts towards a bigger good, which is reparation that is legally codified, and then ultimately also, of course, has the reconciliation element to it. For where this worked, because the communities invited them, or even prompted them, because I think that situation right there was the colleagues were there with the mission at the time. It really was the community walking into the reintegration camp to say, okay, we want to do this, and that's where it started from, right? It was an important prompt for everyone, and something that was also quickly brought up to the attention of the often very aloof sort of Bogota circles, that there's a readiness to proceed in this, and that basically the institutionality needs to catch up with what already is reality on the ground and willingness, right? But that doesn't, it is not a one size fit all across the board with communities. The experience that I shared earlier was in what is considered a conducive environment for reconciliation, because it was an area where they would be more welcome as D- than elsewhere. But still, yes, it didn't satisfy everyone in the same manner, right? So we had that confrontation in that moment. Let me add one point on punishment, and I mean, this conversation could go on for more hours. Very clearly, I'm cognizant of the time, but on the punishment, the wider society in Colombia, and certainly the urban elite, think in very binary terms about reconciliation. We want to see, and I've had that discussion and heard that argument on many occasions. We want to see the former FARC leaders kneeling down on the ground, digging out mines from the dirt of the land that they have put themselves, and really, and that sort of term, very blatant terms, right? Not the idea of reconciliation, the idea of punishment, right? They want to see that they clearly go through that pain that they have inflicted themselves, that they have inflicted on others. And there's a difference between what is rural communities and urban elites, very clearly, where urban elites more quickly are less forgiving, as I said, and have a much more radical stance towards the agreement, and rural communities that need to make this work, as you say in that example, right? We need that access to the land. We want to return to productive use of it. So the peace process was as complex as that, because you needed to cater to the different audiences, and then of course need to have political will, leadership, and vision to make this happen. And that I will attribute to the ex-combatant communities throughout, that the level of commitment that they've shown, not only in our project with Humanicemos, but across the board, has been inspiring, really inspiring, and not necessarily matched by the same willingness on the political institution side.
And probably just to add what to this topic, I see, and I don't know whether you would agree with this, Philip, but this is very complex in the sense that, you know, one thing is what the people want in some of the regions of Colombia in terms of demining, as they see it as a sort of restorative justice. You know, you did this wrong, come and do this for us. But for example, Humanicemos could not go there and do that just as by magic, because what Philip was sharing, and what I think this is the complexity of this issue, is that the areas of demining are given or offered by the Colombian state. So there is an institution called Descontamina Colombia, and Descontamina Colombia is the institution of the Colombian state that has mapped the whole Colombian territory and gives specific zones to different mine action organizations. And in the case of Humanicemos DH, as Philip was saying, Humanicemos is restricted to work in Caquetá, and not in the whole of Caquetá, but in 4 zones in Caquetá. And those zones are given by the Colombian state because they have assessed that the security conditions for them to do the work there are enough, and so Humanicemos will get those zones. Which is interesting, and this is the complexity of what's happening, is that some members who are already working within Humanicemos as former combatants of Humanicemos, but most of them are, of course, they have some of their judicial proceedings in the JEP. Not all of them, but few of them. So the work that they could end up doing in Humanicemos eventually could be part of the, the reduced sentence or whatever they are going to get from the special jurisdiction for peace in the future. But it's not necessarily going to be the case for, if you have a process or a sentence of by the HEP of doing demining work in some regions of the country that is not Caquetá, I don't have it clear how that is gonna work out, because that needs to be negotiated with Descontamina Colombia. So, communities can request lots of things, and they could say, this is what I see, it will restore my rights, but it's not as easy as that the only actor in the middle of this is the special jurisdiction for peace. And because of the technical work that Phillip was mentioning, because this requires so many different sort of stipulations of quality of work in order to declare a territory free of mines, this is something that cannot be just decided by the HEP. Am I right, Phillip, to think about this in this way?
Yeah, that's correct. Just very briefly, I mean, it came down to a discussion of what is the higher constitutional obligation that the Colombian state has. Is it signing the APMBC, the Anti-Personal Mine Ban Convention, which obligates the Colombian state to clear the land in line with global best practices, strategic planning, distribution, allocation of the tasks to different operators? Or is it the peace agreement that says, that could say, okay, reparatory actions in mine action need to be accessible to as many ex-combatants as possible, which is technically very difficult to do in the sector. Also, I mean, you look at Pastora Lapa, just to give an example. There's no way that a person of his age could actually do the physical, very demanding work of demining, right? So there's elements around mine action, logistics elements, management elements where, of course, that could come into play. But this very sort of crude sense of an eye for an eye, get your knees dirty and your hands dirty, and doesn't work as easily as you say, indeed, for exactly those reasons.
So let's open the floor for more questions or comments coming from the people who are sitting here, so that we again can get a richer conversation, a richer dialogue going on from doubts or ideas that come to people with the things that we have been sharing. But just to say this, Phillip, and probably to share with everyone else, when we went to Colombia, I think that the initial work that you did with communities and former FARC combatants in mine education was really useful and really important, because we went in one of the visits that the Humanicemos team did to one of the ethnic communities who have actually benefited from demining activities, and the area had been already declared free of mines. And this the way how the communities referred to former FARC combatants and the way how they were received on the ground, even though this was not part of the special jurisdiction for peace, even though the Truth Commission was not part of it, even it was, you could see that trust had been rebuilt, and that they saw each other as part of working for the same purpose and feeling that their territory was different. And I always felt that there was something of them having been former combatants that, and I don't know if this was okay or not, but they were willing to go beyond the strict mandate of what they were required to do. So sometimes the communities started telling me, can you fix the road? Can you help us with this? And there were things that were just beyond the bullet points of the demining activity itself that helped to rebuild relationships between the communities and the former combatants without being thinking about the transitional justice mechanism, just because of the practicality of the action of changing the real life on the ground. And that was very, very inspiring. Who else? Okay, Maria, please. Oh, great to have you here.
Hi, how are you, Phillip, Andre, and
Hola, Maria.
everyone? I am Maria Sanz. I work in Humanicemos DH. It's a pleasure to be here and have Phillip talking about us, about our process. And I wanted to react to the question that Andre just made. And there is something that we wanted to do in our new project. We always talked about IGMA and doing all this demining process, but we also now are doing in this new project some kind of help to the communities in small projects that help the development of the communities. And because we had those kind of reactions from the communities, help us with this school, please help us with the road, help us with this, with that. We wanted to add it to the project that we are now doing also in Caquetá in the 3 parts that we have assigned, because we see it as a result of how the demining process helps the development of these communities. Because demining is not just demining the soil and just leaving it there. We wanted to go beyond that and helping truly to the development of the regions. So now we are starting to do small projects. They're also related to those kind of communities asking for our help. But now we are going to project it on the SDGs, knowing how we really help for the development of these SDGs in the communities. For example, how Mine Action also works towards the education of the children in these regions. How Mine Action also helps for the development of women in these regions. So for us, it's not only the IGMA process, the reconciliation process, the reincorporation process for the people that are in the reincorporation process in Humanicemos, is more how our work goes towards the development of these regions and these people. So yes, I know we had these kinds of things that the communities ask for us to do, but now they are really projects so that these kind of actions are evaluated. We know what kind of impact we have in these communities, and it's not just helping the communities for helping them. It's just helping the communities so that this kind of help has a real result and impact. So that I just wanted to add that.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Maria. And, you know, I mean, we really value your presence here. I mean, you know, talking about Humanicemos, and now we have Maria from Humanicemos here, who could also answer some other questions if you have any. So I would like to continue inviting other people in the space to ask questions or to share their thoughts. Eric, fantastic. Over to you.
Yes, so I've been a street pastor for 14 years, and what that means in this country is that people of different faiths come together, they pray together, they pray for each other. And so I think because Colombia is mostly a Christian country, the incentive to pray and the fear of God is the incentive to come together. I think also the incentive is that I can never be at peace unless my enemies are at peace. And so unless I can make peace with my enemies, I pass my conflict on to my children and my grandchildren. And so the incentive there is always to possibly more to let go of the past and work towards peace for our children and our grandchildren. And tragically in Colombia, with so many millions of victims, there can never be true justice. It can just never happen. And somehow there is the need to pray for each other, to let go of the past and to seek solutions for the future for our children.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes, sorry.
Thanks so much for sharing this, and it makes me think about the role of faith-based organizations in reconciliation. And I was wondering, because there are so many faith-based organizations, whether you came across of some of the relationship between faith-based organizations and the work of Humanicemos. And I don't know if Maria or Phillip have some ideas on that in order to make this work happen. And I see that again now we have Natalia Suarez, so let's carry on with this moment of the dialogue. So Natalia, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Jan and everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to get to listen to you. I have been thinking about a lot of reconciliation because actually we had a session with a professor of Universidad La Sabana who was making a research on a focal point to see how victims felt reconciliated. And that was like blowing my mind because he was talking about how reconciliation could be measured. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he thought he was telling us that in one approach of reconciliation, it could be measured about the needs of the victims being satisfied, because reconciliation is directly connected to justice, to their perception of justice, and depends on the justice, the type of justice the victim is seeking. So if a victim is seeking like a restorative justice, those kind of actions will repair them, and in fact that would make them feel reconciled. But if they were looking for a distributive justice, those actions wouldn't make that person feel repaired, and therefore he or she wouldn't feel reconciled. And I was like really trying to understand that, because when we talk about the work Humanicemos DH does, it's about reparation, and in fact with all the transitional justice approach. But it makes me wonder how victims are questioning themselves about what type of justice, if this approach, like if we follow this approach, what type of justice they require. And it could be like a mixture of both. And the conclusion of this study was that most victims don't feel reconciled because of these factors, and they feel like they have not been repaired according to their justice, and therefore they don't feel reconciled. And it makes me wonder how challenging it is for some victims that have been, I'm sorry for being redundant, but some victims that have been victims or mines or this type of artifacts, when they say like nothing can repair of give me back the member I lost, or the family member I lost because of mines. And it's really complex to try to understand this type of justice these people are seeking, and especially because of this process is so complex that some victims might feel that actually peace signatories and ex-combatants are having opportunities that they may not. So it makes me wonder how we can start looking for projects that go beyond, as Andre analyzes, beyond the logical framework and stuff, and trying to understand those type of justice victims are seeking, and also what former combatants have been also seeking, because we were also discussing an amazing thing about the identity of the victim, and victims are identifying themselves as such. And we had an amazing discussion about the victim's identity of former combatants who were also victims of violence and started this whole cycle, and how we could put those identities to talk and to trying to seek reconciliation with these very interesting approaches. So it's very nice for me to be here and to be able to have, like Andre says, this food for thought and these connections in my mind. So thank you so much for this space.
Thank you, Natalia. Great. Can I just bring Lucia, and then we go back to you and we do a wrap up, because I can see that the time is getting to us. Thank you, Phil.
Hi guys, I'll be super short. So first of all, thanks to everyone for sharing. This has been really interesting, and I was actually on top of what Natalia has been saying, but also what Maria has said about the other projects that are now being developed from Mine Action. I was just wondering how perhaps the order of activities or projects might impact how receptive people in the community are to the help or to the contributions of the former combatants. So I think obviously it sounds really impactful, working on mine action, and then perhaps kind of having built a little bit of a relationship, moving to other projects that might be unrelated or not directly related to the acts of the former combatants from before, from during the war, and therefore kind of now we're able to, through this relationship, move to other projects that might be contributing the community. But yeah, I've been wondering whether there might also ever be instances where starting on other projects that might be unrelated can be opening doors to projects that are more emotionally heavy or more directly involved with the actions of the former combatants. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but just kind of wondering how different people, at what points do different people open themselves up to the opportunity to reconciliation? I think that's my thought.
Thanks, Lucia. Philip, you know, I think there is lots of food for thought here. So you want to react in a general way. I see also that Maria has put her hand up, but I think let's go to you and then let's see how we start wrapping up with Maria's comment too.
Okay, I mean, if it's okay to run a couple of minutes over and it's not a fixed format, then great. Briefly to your point, Lucia, but also expanding on Maria. I mean, this is something that we see in the wider sector. The mine action shouldn't stop at simply taking the mine out of the ground. It should go beyond. So what comes next? What if the land that we have cleared is not even used by the community? What good was the intervention and the cost in the first place? Right. That's where the community engagement is very important to prioritize where you direct those interventions. In Colombia specifically, that is also something that is due to the consistent neglect of rural areas by central governments. So mine action was something that was one of the few things that in the wake of the peace agreement was well funded because donors understood it and was quickly rolled out, perhaps a little bit too quickly, and that was spearheading something that was supposed to be a broader development initiative. So the demining happens, and then of course all the development actors would come in. But what happened in effect was that the demining organizations cleared their work and then looked over their shoulder to see who else had come with them to basically now provide a broader range of services, and there was nobody. So the communities would turn to them to say like, okay, well, you know, now help me with my hospital and with my bridge and whatnot. So it's very important to articulate and coordinate mine action with a wider development approach, and that's really where the nexus comes in its full meaning. I think mine action is one of the examples that really work in all these dimensions and that are so important to be thought in all those dimensions as well. And so Maria's point is very or experience or plan for Humanicemos is very timely. And a quick point to you, Natalia. Great reflections, really, absolutely very good food for thought. I'll add one dimension to that, because at the end you mentioned the ex-combatants as victims, or understand them as victims as well. That is something that is very much fell sort of under the radar in Colombia, because they have been traumatized on many occasions themselves, right? They had to give up life dreams to join the guerrilla, sometimes more often than not forcibly. They saw friends die, and they have been in terrible situations. And we weren't, of course, we were cognizant of the fact, and the peace agreement foresees a whole psychosocial element, but it was again notoriously underfunded and continues to be. For us to understand that when we set up the organization at the very onset, and our thinking was, okay, that the organization needs to have a narrative so that it can prop up the peace agreement. It's one of those examples where the peace agreement is actually working. It's a quick peace dividend that can be communicated, a quick win for everyone to show this is working. And we went through what we called communication workshops. Okay, this is the organization, this is why you do it, this is your commitment to the peace. So here's your 3-4 talking points basically that you take to the various contexts that you go speak in. And we realized in the course of the communications, because they would start with icebreakers, you know, where do you come from? What did you want to be as a child? And that systematically, all the participants would really sort of break down in those moments, because they came to realize of what their past was, and it put them on an entirely different trajectory than we had foreseen. We were thinking about the organization, but they really had the only and first opportunity to talk about themselves, right? And they were really offloading, and we had some very dramatic moments in terms of trying to come to grasp with what their experiences have been, what they have lived, because there's hardly any mechanism to have that. So yes, very much so. Ex-combatants are as traumatized as many of the victimized populations, right? And that's something that really needs to be understood in the process of reconciliation as well. Mine action lends itself because they felt they can finally do something good and not only be demonized as the perpetrators and the bad guys and girls, but it is something that is still undervalued in this process, I think.
Thank you, Philip. Great. Shall we, Maria, over to you.
Right, thanks, Philip. Yes, I had an answer for the faith-based organization. We work with Caritas Germany in Colombia. They have a presence here in Colombia, and they work towards the education of the population in mine risk. And so they worked with us. They financed part of a project doing the mine risk education 2 years ago. And now I really loved the Natalia intervention, because it's really we're working towards not only working in the mine action system and working towards the reconciliation process that we do in our actions every day, but we wanted also to do a project that we're now doing with Rodeemos el Diálogo for the understanding of what kind of reconciliation we need as for a part as the government, for another part as victims. We have different kind of victims too, and also what kind of reconciliation the people in reincorporation process needs, or how they see it too, because it can't be a one-way process. It has to have many points of view. So that's another kind of project we're working on. We're not only AICMA, we're not only mine action, we are also reconciliation. So for us, it's a really important project too. And how challenging is for the victims of EO to reconciliate? That kind of answer, we don't have it right now, but we hope to have it soon. Because for us, it's really important to know, for example, a person in reconciliation, in reincorporation process, how they see as victims, how they see themselves as victims. Because right now, as the government sees it, they are not victims at all. So for us, it's really important too that they can have that kind of mindset that they can also be a victim, but if they don't recognize themselves as a victim, they can't be a victim. So it's very difficult to coordinate a project that has all these different points of views and has all these different aspects to it. In the reconciliation timeline, in the project's timeline that Lucia asked, it's very important, as Phillip said, that this is a fairly coordinated action, because when we go to the communities, we go there not only to see where the contamination is, we go there to know how the community is acting, what needs they have. So for us, in this moment, in this new project that I commented before, we are doing a baseline of those needs that are also coordinated with the actions of the government and other cooperating actors in these kind of regions, because our actions can be just actions that doesn't have any impact on them. So for that impact to be a true impact on the time, the long time, the long term, we have to coordinate with other actors too. So we have different lines of coordinations with the community, with the regional actors, with the national actors too, to know what they are doing for these communities and for their development. And based on what the communities need and what the authorities are thinking of doing for this development in their territories, we coordinate our actions. For example, we have a school in Solita that it's now reported as contaminated by explosive ordnance. So this school, it's a really small school, but it's impacting the whole community because mothers can't go to work, because their children can't go to school. And that you have a chain of effects of that kind of contamination that blocks the development of the region. So when you see that it's just, I don't know, helping that community to erase completely the impact of this explosive ordinance, you have to see it as a whole, and you have to go to those communities to say, okay, this is one of your problems. We have this territory assigned by Descontamina Colombia to work on the demining actions, but we can also help you to see what kind of actions we can do with this kind of school. Because when you have this kind of school, you don't have only the contamination problem, you have also the infrastructure problems, you have also the connectivity problems, you have many other problems that are added to that small I say small, but it's not small, contamination problem. So for us, it's seeking to connect all these problems to one piece of land, that we can decontaminate. We can also help with the community, and we can coordinate it with the local and the national government. So that really does an impact. So for us, it's a really big work that we are doing right now, because we believe it or not, we are only 112 people, but most of us work on the demining process. So for us as managers, because I'm a manager in Humanicemos, doing this kind of actions is for them to also learn a new kind of communication with the communities. For example, talking about gender, also it's a new challenge for us, talking about gender with communities, LGBTIQ plus communities also, it's a new for us. So it's really difficult, it's challenging, but I think as Phillip said, the Mine Action program, it's really complete. And I invite you to look at the last study that GICHD did on the SDGs on Colombia, how the demining process also impacts 16 of the 17 SDGs on 2030 in Colombia. So it's really important that we see it like that.
Thanks, Maria. I mean, the first conclusion that comes to my mind of this dialogue is that we need to do a follow-up dialogue with Maria, to hear, again, I probably like some of the stories on the ground, but we really wanted to start today with Phillip for one reason, and it's because Phillip was witnessing a really historic moment in Colombia, and the creation of Humanicemos happened thanks to the support of the international community. It was an act of imagination, of creativity, as Phillip has said, coming from former combatants. And it's really powerful to see when one of these ideas has the support of actors who are deeply committed, who have the power to help move things forward, all the results that this can bring. So let me just wrap up this dialogue, because we've been here for more than an hour and a half, by saying the following. I hope that all of you who have been paying attention to this dialogue recognize that talking about reconciliation is not easy. Talking about mind action is not easy. It involves lots of different activities. I mean, just when Philip was going through the different activities that involve mind action, you know, the list was pretty long, 4 pillars he was mentioning, and within those different elements. But let's just say the following. First, I think in this dialogue, it's clear that reconciliation processes are not perfect. They are full of tensions. They are full of complexities. They do not happen overnight. They rely on the creativity of different actors. Sometimes the victims are the ones who take the initiative. Sometimes the perpetrators take the initiative. They do it because they have different needs. In some cases, the perpetrators are also victims, but they have a need to reincorporate into society, and they imagine something new that they can do to offer in order to reintegrate into society, in order to move back into a relationship of trust with communities who distrust them. But of course, in that a scenario that is the one that we have been exploring today, because in this case is an initiative created by former FARC combatants saying, we want to do this, we want to do it in order to work on reconciliation, but also in order to have a socio-economic project of reincorporation into society. They have to face the needs of the victims, and the needs of the victims are different. And this is complex sometimes because victims feel that that there is an unbalanced equation between what the former combatants are getting and what they are getting. And sometimes comes this big discussion about what is the just solution to this. Do we want just to work with the former combatants and let them help us with development projects? And do we want to rebuild the social fabric? Or we also want to see them punished by the actions that they did? What I think we have seen in the case of Humanicemos in Caquetá is that because of the practical restorative dimension of the work of mind action, many people prioritize the restorative nature of that justice. But I think it's not the case, and we cannot claim that it will be always the case across Colombia, but it's very inspiring that this can happen. But what we have seen also is that, and Phillip was mentioning it, is that at the national level, Colombian society, the people who have not suffered the mining of their territories, have also needs and have ideas of what they need, because they have a picture of what the FARC are. And some of them really want to see some of the commanders of the FARC doing demining, not as a way of restoring relationships, but as a way of punishment, which shows the paradox of how these things work. And what Phillip was just telling us is, if what they want to see is to punish someone like Rodrigo Londoño doing demining, well, he won't be able to do it, because all of these demining activities involve very serious technical training, and they will never be able to do that because probably they are too old to do it and all of that. And in those complexities, national reconciliation is trapped. So I guess we have seen today that this discussion about demining, mind action, involves discussions about justice, about peace, about truth, and about apologies. You know, because what I saw in Caquetá, and I think Phillip has been saying, is that also the FARC were reaching to the communities, acknowledging responsibility for the past and the wrongdoings that the organization as a whole did. And that was a way of building trust. So I believe that there is much more that we could explore, thinking about the link between mind action and reconciliation. But for the moment, I think we could leave it there. And I would invite everyone here in this space to offer a round of applause to Phillip for coming here, for igniting this conversation, and for making it so rich for all of us. So thank you, Phillip.
The applause goes to Humanicemos, really.
Brilliant. So let's can we stop the recording? Brilliant. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us in this space. It was fantastic. And we really look forward to seeing you in future dialogues on reconciliation. Phillip, thank you so much. Maria, thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
Por nada. Gracias. Ciao, Andy. We'll be in touch. Thanks. And I would like to join that beer in the King's Arms, but I think I won't be able from Geneva, unfortunately.
I know, that's the problem. If anyone is in Oxford, I didn't get any message, by the way, but for the late arrivals, if anyone is in Oxford and want to grab a pint, please send me a message in the next 1 minute. Private message. Bye, Phillip. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lucia.